They say blood is thicker than water, but on my graduation day, my parents priced our bond at exactly $1 million. They publicly disowned me to secure a twisted inheritance, leaving me feeling like a returned product. But a stranger in a black suit stood up from the back row. As he approached the podium, my parents realized that seven-figure check was about to become the most expensive paper they ever signed. My name is Thalia Ashmore, and as I sat in the suffocating humidity of the Columbia University quad, I felt less like a graduate and more like an intruder in a very expensive, very exclusive club. The late May sun was beating down on us, turning the sea of light blue graduation gowns into a collective oven around me. The children of senators, hedge fund managers, and oil tycoons were buzzing with a specific kind of energy. It was not just excitement. It was the effortless confidence of people who knew their safety nets were woven from platinum threads. They were adjusting their tassels and checking their phones, already planning the after-parties in the Hamptons or the flights to Mykonos. I was doing something different. I was calculating the exact amount of money I had left in my checking account. It was exactly $412.33. That had to last me until I found a job that paid a living wage in one of the most expensive cities on earth. I reached up and adjusted my mortarboard for the 10th time in the last 5 minutes. The bobby pin was digging into my scalp, a sharp, grounding pain that kept me from floating away into a panic attack. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly. I clasped them together, forcing them into submission. You did it, I told myself. You are the valedictorian. You are graduating summa cum laude. You survived. But survival was a low bar when you were in Ashmore. I turned my head slightly, scanning the VIP section near the front of the stage. The university reserved these seats for the biggest donors and the most distinguished alumni, and there they were. Richard and Elena Ashmore. My parents. Even from this distance, they looked like a magazine cutout of the perfect American power couple. My father, Richard, was wearing a charcoal bespoke suit that fit him with military precision. His silver hair was combed back, not a single strand out of place, catching the sunlight like polished steel. Beside him, my mother, Elena, sat with the posture of a queen who smelled something unpleasant. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that I knew cost more than my entire 4 years of tuition combined. She had oversized sunglasses on, hiding her eyes, but I knew the expression beneath them. It was the same expression she had worn when I told her I wanted to study literature and ethics instead of corporate law. It was a look of profound, bored disappointment. For 4 years, our relationship had been a transactional Cold War. They had paid my tuition. Yes, they made sure to remind me of that fact in every brief, icy email they sent. But that was where the support ended. They covered the school fees to keep up appearances, and Ashmore could not be seen taking out student loans. After all, but they cut me off from everything else. No living allowance, no rent money, no connections. If you want to live in the city, my father had said the summer before my freshman year, swirling a glass of scotch while I stood with my bags packed, you will learn the value of $1. We are not raising a parasite. Thalia. So, while my peers were interning at their parents' companies or backpacking through Europe, I was working double shifts at a diner in the Bronx and freelance copy editing until 3 a.m. I lived in a closet-sized apartment with 2 roommates and a radiator that sounded like a dying engine. I ate instant noodles and day-old bagels. I learned the value of $1. All right. I learned that it was the only thing my parents actually respected. But today was supposed to be different. I felt a tiny spark of hope, a foolish, fragile thing, blooming in my chest. I was the top of my class. I had written a thesis on corporate ethical restructuring that had already been cited in an academic journal. I had done everything right. I had become the excellence they demanded. Surely, seeing me walk across that stage, hearing my name called out as the best of the best, would crack the ice. Surely, today, I would get a smile, maybe a hug. Maybe my father would clap me on the shoulder and say, "Well done, Thalia. We were hard on you, but you proved us wrong." I squinted against the glare. trying to read their body language. They did not look like proud parents waiting for their daughter's big moment. They looked tense, rigid. My father was checking his watch repeatedly. A sharp, jerky motion. My mother was clutching her clutch bag so tightly, her knuckles were white. They weren't looking at the stage. They were looking at each other, whispering furiously. Then I noticed the person sitting next to them. My heart gave a strange, syncopated thump. It was Mr. Henderson, the family attorney. He was a man who looked like he had been born in a boardroom, gray and indistinct. He was sweating profusely in the heat, mopping his forehead with a handkerchief. A large leather briefcase rested on his knees. Why was the family lawyer at a graduation ceremony? My parents never went anywhere with Henderson unless they were buying a company or suing someone. A cold prickle of unease ran down my spine, contrasting sharply with the sweltering heat. Was something wrong? Was someone sick? Or was this about the business? Maybe they were merging the company and wanted to tell me I had a trust fund waiting. No. That was a childish fantasy. The Ashmores didn't do surprises. They did contracts. The ceremony dragged on. Speeches about the future, about changing the world, about the limitless potential of our generation. The words washed over me like white noise. I was fixated on that trio in the front row. The lawyer, the father, the mother. They looked like a tribunal, not a family. And now, the dean's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, snapping me back to reality. It is my distinct honor to present the valedictorian of the class of 2026, a student who has exemplified academic rigor and moral leadership, Thalia Ashmore. The applause was polite but enthusiastic. My classmates cheered, the girl sitting next to me, a sweet history major I barely knew, squeezed my arm. "Go get him, Thalia," she whispered. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, like they were filled with lead shot. I navigated the row of chairs, stepping over feet, murmuring apologies. I walked down the center aisle toward the stage. The crimson carpet seemed to stretch out for miles. The sun was blinding. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Don't trip. Whatever you do, do not trip. I ascended the stairs. The dean was smiling, holding a leather-bound diploma cover, but he didn't hand it to me. Instead, he gestured to the side. "We have a special surprise today," the dean announced, beaming. "To present this diploma, we have invited a very special guest, a distinguished alumnus of this university, a pillar of the New York business community, and the father of our valedictorian. Please welcome Mr. Richard Ashmore." The crowd applauded politely. My stomach dropped. This wasn't in the rehearsal. My father stood up from the VIP section and walked up the stairs to the stage. He moved with the prowling grace of a predator entering a clearing. He didn't look at me, not once. He walked past the dean, shook his hand briefly, and then took his place behind the podium. I stood there, center stage, feeling exposed. I smoothed the front of my gown, my palms sweating. I forced a smile onto my face, the kind of smile that made your cheeks ache. This is it. I thought, he's going to do it. He's going to claim credit for my success. He's going to say, it was all due to the Ashmore genes. Fine, I don't care. Just let him be proud. I took a step forward, ready to receive the diploma. I half raised my hand, expecting him to take it. I was ready for the photo op, the handshake, the acknowledgement of my existence. Richard Ashmore ignored my hand. He looked at me then. For the first time, his eyes were blue, like mine, but they were devoid of any warmth. They were flat and hard, like chips of ice. There was no pride there. There was only a cold, calculating resolve. He reached out and adjusted the microphone. The screech of feedback cut through the air, making the audience wince. The silence that followed was absolute. "Thank you, Dean," my father said. His voice was deep, resonant, the voice of a man used to commanding boardrooms. It echoed across the lawn, bouncing off the neoclassical buildings. "It is a privilege to stand here at my alma mater." He paused. He looked out at the sea of graduates, then turned his body slightly so he was facing me, but speaking to them. "We send our children to these hallowed halls to learn. he continued, to learn history, science, philosophy. But there is one lesson that cannot be taught in a classroom. It is the lesson of integrity, the lesson of honor. My smile faltered. My hand dropped to my side. What was he talking about? The Ashmore family has built its legacy on two things, he said, his voice rising slightly. Honesty and blood. We believe that a name is a promise, and when that promise is broken, when the name is tarnished, we must take action, no matter how painful. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People were shifting in their seats. This did not sound like a congratulatory toast. It sounded like a sermon or a sentencing. I cannot, in good conscience, present this degree, my father said, and his voice dropped to a register that was terrifyingly calm. Nor can I allow the deception to continue. Standing before you is a young woman who has the highest grades. Yes, but grades do not make a person. I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees began to shake. Dad, I whispered. The microphone didn't pick it up. But he saw my lips move. He didn't blink. Thalia, he said into the microphone, saying my name like it was a disease he was trying to spit out. I stand here today to correct a mistake. You have paraded yourself as an Ashmore. You have used our name to open doors, but your lifestyle, your choices over these last 4 years, have proven that you are not one of us. The lie hung in the hot air, gross and heavy. My lifestyle, my choices. I worked, I studied, I slept. That was it. What was he talking about? We have evidence, he continued, lying with a fluidity that was almost impressive, of behavior that is incompatible with our family values, moral turpitude, deceit, a life that we cannot support. The murmurs grew louder. I could see the students in the front rows whispering, pointing. Phones were coming out. They were recording this. I felt like the ground was dissolving under my feet. Therefore, Richard Ashmore boomed, let it be known today, before God and this assembly, that Thalia Ashmore is no longer a member of our family. He reached into his inner suit jacket pocket. I flinched, as if he were pulling out a gun, but he pulled out a folded piece of paper. I am hereby publicly disowning her, he declared. She is cut off from the Ashmore line. She is cut off from the Ashmore fortune. She is, effectively immediately, a stranger to us. He looked down at the VIP row. Elena, I looked down too. My mother stood up. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the lawyer, Mr. Henderson. She nodded once, a sharp, mechanical jerk of her chin. In her hand, she held the thick manila envelope I had seen earlier. She raised it slightly, acknowledging the signal. My father turned back to me. The microphone was still live, but he leaned in close. Invading my personal space, the audience couldn't hear this part, but to me, it was deafening. It is nothing personal, Thalia, he hissed, his breath smelling of mint and rot. Your uncle's will is very specific, $1 million to the Ashmore line, provided there are no female heirs dependent on the estate. He hated women who couldn't stand on their own. By disowning you, by proving you are morally unfit and casting you out, we unlock the funds immediately. You are just collateral damage. He pulled back and spoke into the microphone again, his voice regaining its public grandeur. We do this for the sanctity of our family. Thank you. He placed the microphone back on the stand. For a second, nobody moved. The dean looked horrified, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. The graduates were frozen. The parents were stunned. I stood there, alone on the vast stage. The sun was still shining, but the world had gone gray. I felt a physical pain in my chest, as if my heart had actually shattered. It wasn't just the cruelty, it was the calculation. They had planned this, the lawyer, the speech, the timing. They had turned my greatest achievement into a public execution to secure a payout. They had sold me for cash. I looked at the crowd, 2,000 faces staring back at me. Some looked pitying, some looked amused. Most just looked hungry for the drama. Silence descended on the auditorium. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, a dead thing that swallowed the sound of the wind and the distant traffic. It was the silence of a life ending. I was 24 years old. I was the valedictorian, and I was an orphan, not by death, but by a business decision. The silence stretched on, thick and terrible, pressing against my eardrums until I thought they would burst. The silence that followed my father's proclamation was not empty. It was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against my lungs and made it impossible to draw a full breath. I felt like a specimen pinned to a dissection board. Flayed open for 2,000 people to critique, the rush of blood in my ears was deafening, a roar that sounded like the ocean during a storm, drowning out the confused rustling of the crowd. I was naked in my graduation gown, stripped of every defense I thought I had built over the last 4 years. Richard Ashmore did not step back. He stood his ground, dominating the podium, his presence consuming all the oxygen on the stage. The dean made a fluttering motion with his hands, stepping forward as if to intervene, to salvage the dignity of his ceremony, but my father held up a hand, a sharp, authoritarian stop sign that froze the academic in his tracks. "We are resolving a legal matter," my father said, his voice projecting clearly, even though he had stepped slightly away from the center of the mic. "It is best done quickly." He turned his back on the audience, creating a small, private theater of cruelty right there on the platform. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in his mask. He wasn't just angry, he was desperate. There was a frantic, hungry gleam in his eyes that I had never seen before. He took a step closer to me, invading my personal space until I could smell the stale coffee on his breath beneath the mint. He reached out and tapped the microphone head, creating a dull thud-thud that echoed through the speakers. He thought he had switched it off. He hadn't. "Stop looking at me like a wounded animal. Thalia," he whispered, but the hot microphone caught the sibilant hiss of his voice, amplifying it into a ghostly, snake-like sound that rippled across the front rows. "You knew this was coming. You knew you never fit the mold." "Why?" I managed to choke out. My voice was broken, a rusted hinge that refused to work. "Why here? Why now?" Richard leaned in further, his lips inches from my ear, to the crowd. It must have looked like a father giving a final, stern lecture. To me, it was a confession. "Because of Uncle Vance," he hissed. The name hit me like a physical blow. Great Uncle Vance, the misogynistic recluse who had died 3 weeks ago, the man who had famously declared that women were incapable of managing finances and should be kept as wards, never as owners. "He left a contingency in the trust," my father continued, the words spilling out of him rapidly, fueled by greed. "The primary estate releases $1 million to the male head of the household immediately upon his death. But there is a clause, a poison pill. The executor cannot release a single cent if there is, and I quote, a female dependent of the direct line who relies on family charity." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "Charity. I worked 3 jobs. I never asked you for—" "It doesn't matter," Richard snapped, forgetting the microphone for a split second. The boom of his voice made the dean jump. He lowered his volume instantly, his eyes darting to the side. "As long as you legally carry the name and have inheritance rights, the lawyers view you as a liability to the payout. Vance wanted to ensure his money went to a man who could control his house. If we have a daughter, we lose the money. If we have a stranger, we get the cash." The cruelty of it was so precise, so mathematical, that it momentarily stunned my emotions into silence. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an obstacle to a bank transfer. I was a clause in a contract that needed to be redlined. That was why they were here. That was why the lawyer was here. They needed a public, irrevocable spectacle to prove to Uncle Vance's executors that I was gone, dead to them. "So I'm worth $1 million to you," I whispered, the realization settling in my stomach like cold lead. "But only if I don't exist." "Don't be dramatic," Richard sneered. "You're worth nothing to the estate, but your absence is liquid capital." He signaled to the side of the stage. Mr. Henderson, the family attorney, was already moving. He ascended the stairs with a speed that belied his age, clutching his briefcase against his chest. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the dean. He looked only at the document in his hand. The crowd was no longer silent. The shock had worn off, replaced by a rising tide of murmurs. I could see the glow of smartphone screens held high, hundreds of them. Little rectangular eyes recording my humiliation. I was trending. I was viral content. The girl who got dumped by her parents for a check. Henderson reached us and slapped a clipboard onto the flat surface of the podium, right next to my uncollected diploma. "Standard renunciation of claims," Henderson said, his voice flat and bored, as if he were ordering a sandwich. "It waives your right to the name, the estate, and any future trust disbursements. It also includes a non-disclosure agreement regarding the family's financial internalities." "Sign it," my mother's voice cut in. I hadn't noticed her walk up. But there she was, standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at me. She didn't come onto the stage. She stayed in the shadows of the wings, protecting her image, but her eyes were locked on mine. They were pleading, but not for forgiveness. She was pleading for the money. "Just sign it, Talia," she called out, her voice sharp enough to carry. "Don't make this difficult. We are doing what is necessary for the family's survival." Survival. I looked down at her. "You live in a penthouse." "Liquidity issues," Richard grunted, shoving a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen toward my hand. "You wouldn't understand high finance. Now sign. We need this processed by close of business today, to clear the probate court by Monday." I looked at the paper. The letters swam before my eyes. Thalia Ashmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby voluntarily sever all ties, voluntarily. They needed me to agree to my own execution. If I refused, they would be tied up in litigation for years, and they wouldn't get their $1 million. I held the power. For one fleeting second, I held the power. But I was tired. I was so incredibly tired. The sun was beating down, burning the back of my neck. The shame was a physical heat that radiated from my skin. I just wanted to leave. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to go back to my tiny apartment and sleep for a year. "What do I get?" I asked, my voice hollow. Richard blinked, surprised by the transaction. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thin checkbook. He scribbled something furiously, tore it out, and slid it under the clipboard. $5,000, he said. I looked at the check. $5,000? The price of a used car. The price of 2 months of rent in this city. "That is a fresh start," he said, his tone generous, as if he were bestowing a kingdom upon me. "Take it. Go to Europe. Find a husband. Just go away. $5,000 is more than you deserve after the embarrassment you have caused us." I looked at the number. 5,000. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the sound of a cable finally giving way under too much tension. The grief I had felt moments ago, the desire to cry, the longing for a hug, it all evaporated. In its place, a glacier formed, cold, hard, and sharp. I reached out and took the pen. My hand was trembling, but not from fear anymore. It was trembling with a rage so pure it felt like a drug. I looked at the pen, then at my father, then at the paper. They thought I was shaking because I was broken. They didn't see that I was shaking because I was holding back the urge to drive the pen through the podium. I gripped the barrel of the pen so hard my knuckles turned white. I was going to sign. I was going to take their $5,000 and I was going to burn it in front of them. I was going to sign my name, and then I was going to spend the rest of my life making them regret the day they valued me at a fraction of a rounding error. I lowered the pen to the paper. The tip hovered over the signature line. Richard let out a breath he had been holding. He smiled, a triumphant, predatory baring of teeth. "Smart girl," he whispered. I pressed the pen down. "Don't sign that trash, kid." The voice boomed from the back of the auditorium. It wasn't amplified by a microphone, but it didn't need to be. It was a voice made of gravel and thunder, a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. It cut through the humidity. through the murmurs, through the hum of the feedback loop. My hand froze. The ink bled into the paper, forming a single, dark blot where my signature should have been. I looked up. Richard looked up. 2,000 heads turned in unison toward the rear entrance of the quad. The air in the stadium shifted. The humidity seemed to drop. The casual, gossiping atmosphere vanished, replaced by a sudden, intense gravity. Someone had just walked in who didn't just interrupt ceremonies. Someone had walked in who owned the ground the ceremony was built on. My father's face went from triumphant to pale in the span of a single heartbeat. He recognized that voice, and for the first time that day, Richard Ashmore looked small. The sound that cut through the humidity was not a shout. It was the rhythmic, deliberate strike of wood against concrete. Tap, pause, tap, pause. The rhythm was hypnotic, possessing a strange, gravitational pull that forced every head in the audience to turn. I looked up from the clipboard, the pen still hovering over the line that would sign my life away. At the very back of the quad, where the shadows of the ivy-covered administration building stretched long and dark, a figure had separated himself from the crowd. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, though he carried himself with a vitality that made age seem like a mere clerical error. He wore a suit that was not just black, it was a void, cut from a fabric that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. A silver-handled cane was in his right hand, but he did not lean on it for support. He used it as a metronome, marking time as he began to walk down the central aisle. A collective gasp, soft but distinct, rippled through the section where the finance and economics professors sat. Then it spread to the parents in the VIP section. I saw my father, Richard, squint against the glare. Then, as the man moved closer and his features resolved into focus, the sharp, aquiline nose, the shock of white hair swept back from a high forehead, the eyes that burned with a terrifying intelligence, my father's face drained of blood. It was a complete evacuation of color, leaving his skin the shade of old parchment. Beside him, my mother let out a strangled sound, her hand flying to her mouth, dropping the heavy manila envelope she had been guarding so jealously. "Vane," my father whispered. The microphone caught it. It wasn't a name. It was a prayer of terror. Julian Vane. Even I knew the name. Everyone in the business school knew the name. He was not just an investor. He was an institution. He was the founder of Ethelgard Capital, a venture fund so exclusive and so powerful that it was rumored they didn't just predict market trends, they wrote them. He was a ghost in the industry, a man who famously never gave interviews, never attended galas, and never, ever appeared at university graduations. My father's company, Ashmore Logistics, had been trying to secure a preliminary vetting meeting with Vane's junior analyst for 3 years. They had never even gotten a return email, and now the Titan of Wall Street was walking toward us. The security guards at the base of the stage stepped forward instinctively, then stepped back just as quickly as Julian Vane turned his gaze upon them. He did not slow down. He did not speed up. He walked with the terrifying inevitability of a crashing stock market. He ascended the stairs. The sound of his cane striking the wooden hollows of the stage was like a gunshot in the silence. Crack, crack. He walked past the dean, who was bowing so low he looked like he might topple over. He walked past the podium. He walked straight to where I stood, frozen, with the pen in my hand. Julian Vane stopped. He was tall, looming over me, but he did not smell of mint and rot like my father. He smelled of old leather, pipe tobacco, and cold, hard cash. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes scanning my face as if he were reading a balance sheet, assessing assets and liabilities. Then, he turned to my father. Richard was trembling, visibly trembling. The arrogance that had fueled his speech 5 minutes ago had evaporated, leaving behind a small, frightened man in an expensive suit. "Mr. Vane," my father stammered, his voice cracking. "This is an unexpected honor. We had no idea you were—" Julian Vane did not speak. He simply reached out a gloved hand, He didn't reach for a handshake. He reached for the clipboard on the podium. My father watched, paralyzed, as Julian lifted the document I was about to sign. The waiver, the renunciation of my name, the sale of my birthright. Julian held the paper up to the light, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. He read it quickly, his eyes darting back and forth. Then, he let out a laugh. It was a dry, rasping sound, devoid of humor. "Standard liability release," Julian murmured, his voice deep and gravelly. Carrying effortlessly to the first 10 rows. Clause 4, Section B, total severance of familial ties in exchange for a singular lump sum settlement. He looked at the check my father had written. $5,000. Julian read aloud. He turned his gaze back to Richard. The air temperature on the stage seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You are a fool, Richard," Julian said. It was conversational, factual. "I have watched bad trades make men jump out of windows on 4th Avenue. I have seen companies immolate themselves for a quarterly bonus. But this..." Julian shook his head. With a sudden, violent motion that betrayed the strength hidden in his aging frame, he ripped the clipboard from the stand. He tore the paper in half, then in quarters. Then he crumpled the pieces into a ball and tossed them onto the floor at my father's polished shoes. "You sold your daughter too cheap," Julian said. $1 million from the estate. That is the price you put on loyalty. On potential. "I value this young woman significantly higher than that," my father gaped. "You know her." "I know her mind," Julian corrected. "I make it my business to know where the intelligence in this country is hiding. Richard, while you were busy counting the pennies in your uncle's trust fund, I was reading the graduating theses of the Columbia Economics Department." He turned to me. The harshness in his eyes softened. Just a fraction. It wasn't warmth, exactly, but it was respect. It was the look a general gives a soldier who has held the line. "The architecture of moral bankruptcy, ethical restructuring in legacy firms." Julian quoted from memory. "That was the title of your thesis, was it not, Miss Ashmore?" I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. I had written that paper in the back of the diner at 2 a.m, fueled by cheap coffee and rage against my parents' business practices. I thought nobody but my exhausted professor would ever read it. "It was brilliant," Julian said simply, "ruthless in its logic, elegant in its proposed solutions. You argued that modern corporate loyalty is a depreciating asset and that true value lies in the restructuring of human capital. You predicted the collapse of 3 logistics firms in your case studies. 2 of them filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy last week. You were right." He turned back to my parents. "She has the kind of vision you two could not buy with all the money in your stagnating accounts. You see a liability because she is a woman. I see the sharpest mind on this stage." My mother found her voice then. It was shrill and desperate. "Mr. Vane, please, this is a family matter. She has been difficult. We are just trying to—" "You are trying to secure a payout," Julian cut her off, his voice like a whip. "And you have succeeded. You have publicly disowned her. The condition of the will is met. You get your money. Congratulations." He reached into the breast pocket of his coat. He didn't pull out a checkbook. He pulled out a single, small rectangle. It was a business card. But it wasn't paper. It was matte black metal, heavy and sleek, with gold lettering etched into the surface. He held it out to me. "I watched you today." "Thalia," Julian said, "I watched you stand there and take their abuse without shedding a tear. I watched you pick up that pen not to surrender, but to survive. You have steel in your spine. I like steel. It builds skyscrapers." I reached out. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of the card. It felt heavy in my hand. Heavier than it looked. It felt like a weapon. "I am not a charity," Julian said, his voice lowering so that only I could hear the full weight of his offer. "I am not a savior. I am a capitalist, if you want a family. Go find a support group. I cannot give you that. But if you want to build an empire, if you want to learn how to break the people who tried to break you." He nodded at the card in my hand. "Come to my office, Monday morning, 8 o'clock sharp. Do not be late." I looked at the card. Ethelgard Capital, Julian Vane, CEO. There was no phone number, just an address in Lower Manhattan that everyone in the financial world knew by heart. I looked up at him. "Why?" I asked. "Because," Julian said, and a ghost of a smile touched his thin lips. "I need a successor who understands that blood is just a biological fluid, but competence is rare earth metal, and because I detest poor valuations." He turned away from me, dismissing my parents with a wave of his hand as if they were annoying flies. "Come, Miss Ashmore, I have a car waiting. This ceremony has become tedious." He began to walk away, the cane tapping out its rhythm once more. Crack, crack. I stood there for a second. The choice was hanging in the air. I could stay. I could beg my parents for that $5,000. I could try to explain. I looked at Richard and Elena. They were staring at Julian's retreating back with a mixture of hunger and terror. They were already calculating. I could see the gears turning in my father's eyes. He was thinking about how to leverage this. "My daughter works for Vane. We can use this." He took a step toward me, a fake, oily smile plastering itself onto his face. "Thalia, darling," he began, reaching out a hand. "Perhaps we were too hasty. If Mr. Vane sees such potential." "Don't," I said. The word came out calm, clear, and final. I looked at the check for $5,000 still sitting on the podium. I didn't touch it. I looked at the pen I had almost used to sign my life away. I looked at my father, really looked at him. I saw the lines of worry around his eyes, the cheap dye job in his hair, the desperation that permeated his expensive suit. He wasn't a titan. He was just a middle man waiting for a handout from a dead uncle. "You got what you wanted," I said, my voice projecting clearly. "You proved I'm not your daughter. You have your witnesses. You have the video footage." I held up the black metal card. It caught the sun, flashing like a dark mirror. "You have your $1 million, Dad," I said. I took a step back, moving away from them, moving toward the edge of the stage where Julian Vane was waiting. "I hope you invest it wisely," I said, and my voice was as cold as the card in my hand. "And I hope it is enough to last you for the rest of your life. Because it is the last cent you will ever get from anyone." "Thalia," my mother screeched, lunging forward. "You ungrateful little—" But I had already turned my back. I walked down the stairs. The silence in the quad broke. The students erupted. It wasn't polite applause this time. It was a roar, a chaotic, confused, exhilarating mix of cheers and gasps. They knew they had just watched a dynasty crumble, and something new rise from the ashes. I walked down the aisle, my head high, the black gown billowing around me. I caught up to Julian Vane near the exit. He didn't stop, but he slowed his pace just enough for me to fall in step beside him. "Head up," he muttered, not looking at me. "Never let them see you look back at the explosion." "I'm not looking back," I said, and I wasn't. We exited the quad, leaving the heat, the humidity, and the Ashmore legacy behind us. We stepped out onto the New York street where a long black limousine was idling at the curb. A driver opened the door. As I slid into the cool leather interior of the car, I glanced one last time at the stage on the monitors set up outside for the overflow crowd. I saw my parents standing there, small and diminished, arguing with each other while the dean tried to usher them off the stage. They looked like statues from a toppled regime. The door clicked shut, sealing out the noise of the city. "Champagne?" Julian asked, opening a cooler. "Water," I said. "I have work to do on Monday." Julian smiled. "Good answer." The car pulled away, merging into the traffic, carrying me away from Thalia Ashmore, the unwanted daughter, and toward whoever I was about to become. 8 years is a lifetime in the financial markets. In 8 years, empires can rise from a garage in Palo Alto, and century-old institutions can crumble into dust because a CEO tweeted something stupid at 3 a.m. For the girl who stood on that stage in Columbia, weeping internally while the sun beat down on her humiliation, 8 years was the time it took to undergo a complete molecular reconstruction. I was no longer that girl. I was not even legally the same person. The week after I started at Ethelgard Capital, I filed a petition with the New York Supreme Court. I kept my first name Thalia because it was mine, and I refused to let them take everything, but I stripped away my middle name. Elizabeth, which had been my grandmother's name, a woman who had passed down the family tradition of cold indifference, I replaced it with Vera, meaning truth, and while I kept the surname Ashmore, I did it out of spite. In the world of high finance, I wanted the name Ashmore to mean something terrifying, something that had nothing to do with trucking or logistics. I stood now at the window of my corner office on the 45th floor of the Ethelgard Tower in Lower Manhattan. The city was spread out below me like a complex circuit board, humming with the invisible flow of capital. The glass was thick, soundproof, and bullet-resistant. It kept the noise of the world out and the silence of my power in. My reflection in the glass showed a woman who looked nothing like the scholarship student in the thrift store dress. I wore a bespoke suit from a tailor in Savile Row, who usually only cut for men, but made exceptions for women who could buy his building. It was midnight blue, sharp enough to cut skin. My hair was cut into a severe asymmetrical bob that required zero maintenance and intimidated junior analysts just by existing. They called me the Ice Queen of mergers and acquisitions. It was a lazy nickname, born of misogyny and fear. But I did not discourage it. It was useful. When Thalia Ashmore walked into a boardroom, people stopped talking. CEOs of Fortune 500 companies sweated through their Italian shirts. They knew that I did not come to negotiate. I came to dissect. Ms. Ashmore. I turned. My assistant, Marcus, was standing in the doorway. He was 25, brilliant, and terrified of me. He held a tablet with two hands, as if it were a sacred text. "The quarterly reports for the biotech acquisition are ready," he said. "And Mr. Vane is asking for you." "Thank you." "Marcus?" I said. My voice was low and even. I never raised my voice. I never had to. "Tell the biotech team to liquidate the research division by Friday. It is bleeding cash. We are keeping the patents and selling the real estate." "But the staff," Marcus hesitated. "There are 300 researchers." "The staff is redundant," I said, turning back to my desk. "The patents are the asset. The people are the liability. Execute the order." Marcus nodded, swallowing hard, and backed out of the room. I felt nothing. No guilt, no hesitation. This was the lesson Julian Vane had taught me in the fires of the trading floor. Emotion is a variable that ruins the equation. If you want to build, you must be willing to demolish. I walked down the long, silent corridor to Julian's office. The carpet was thick enough to silence the sharp click of my heels. Julian Vane was 81 years old now. The Lion of Wall Street was fading. He sat in a wheelchair behind his massive mahogany desk. A blanket draped over his legs. His skin was translucent, like parchment paper, and his hands shook with a constant, rhythmic tremor. But his eyes were the same, burning, intelligent, relentless. "Thalia," he rasped as I entered. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "You gutted the biotech firm." "It was necessary," I said, sitting down. "They were burning $2 million a month on a pipe dream. I saved the investors 50 cents on the dollar." Julian nodded slowly. "Good. You are sharper than I was at your age." I would have hesitated. I had a soft spot for scientists. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that filled the room. I waited. I did not offer him water. He hated pity. "My time is short. Thalia," he said when the coughing fit passed. "The board knows it. The sharks are circling. They think when I die. Ethelgard will soften. They think they can carve us up. Let them try," I said. "I have files on every board member. I know where they hide their mistresses and their tax evasions. No one moves against us." Julian smiled, revealing teeth that were no longer white. "That is my girl. I never had a child, Thalia. Not really. But I have you. You are the legacy. You are the monument I leave behind." He slid a folder across the desk. It was thin, red, and marked "Confidential." This came across the desk of the charitable trust this morning. Julian said, I thought you might want to handle it personally. I looked at the folder. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. I had a similar digital file on my encrypted server that I updated every Sunday night with religious devotion. Ashmore Logistics, I said. They are desperate, Julian said. They are applying to the Ethelgard Heritage Fund. It is a grant program for distressed family businesses. They are asking for a lifeline. I reached out and took the folder. My fingers tingled. For 8 years, I had watched them. I had watched Richard and Elena take that $1 million from Uncle Vance's estate and blow it with breathtaking incompetence. They had treated the capital injection not as a strategic reserve, but as a lottery win. Richard had bought a 60-foot yacht he named the Patriarch. He spent 6 months a year in the Caribbean, leaving the company in the hands of sycophantic middle managers who robbed him blind. Elena had renovated their Connecticut estate 3 times, importing marble from Italy and silk from China, trying to buy her way into the inner circle of high society that had always sneered at her. They ignored the market, they ignored the shift to automation, they ignored the rising fuel costs, they treated the company account like a personal piggy bank. Now, the bill was due. I opened the folder. The financials were a disaster scene. Revenue was down 40% year over year. Debt obligations were servicing 80% of their cash flow. They were technically insolvent. The banks had cut off their credit lines. They were 1 payroll cycle away from bankruptcy, and in their desperation, they had come to the one place in New York that had enough cash to save them, Ethelgard. They had no idea I ran the division. To them, Ethelgard was just a faceless monolith of money, and Julian Vane was a distant memory, the man who had yelled at them once and then vanished. They probably thought he was dead or senile. They certainly didn't know that the director of strategic philanthropy was the daughter they had sold for a check that was now long gone. How much are they asking for? I asked, scanning the application. The handwriting on the form was my mother's. It was shaky. $5 million, Julian said softly. They claim it is for modernization, but the audit shows they owe $3 million in back taxes and legal fees. They are trying to stay out of prison. Thalia? I closed the folder. The sound was soft, like a coffin lid clicking shut. Do you want me to reject it? Julian asked. No, I said. I stood up and walked to the window of Julian's office. I looked out at the city, feeling a cold, dark thrill uncurl in my stomach. It wasn't happiness. It was the feeling of a trap finally snapping shut after years of waiting. If we reject them, I said, staring at the skyline, they will file for bankruptcy. The assets will be liquidated by the court. They will lose everything. Yes, but they will fade away. They will be victims of the economy. I turned back to Julian. That is too easy, I said. I don't want them to be victims of the economy. I want them to be victims of their own greed. Julian's eyes glittered. What do you propose? Grant the meeting, I said. But not with the loan officers, with the director, with me. They will recognize you, Julian pointed out. Will they? I asked. It has been 8 years. I have lost 20 pounds. I dress differently. I walk differently. And more importantly, Julian, they don't see people. They see wallets. They won't be looking at my face. They will be looking at the checkbook. And if they do recognize you, then the game ends early, I said. But if they don't, if they walk into my web willingly, I let the sentence hang in the air. Julian chuckled. It was a dark sound. You are cruel, Thalia. I learned from the best, I replied. I picked up the folder. I will handle this. I want the meeting set for Friday, late afternoon. Let them stew all week. Friday it is, Julian said. He closed his eyes, looking suddenly very tired. Make them pay. Thalia, for all of us who were sold short. I left his office and walked back to mine. The hum of the trading floor below was audible now, a distant vibration in the floorboards. I buzzed my assistant. Marcus, I said into the intercom, contact the applicants for the Ashmore Logistics file. Tell them their preliminary application has been flagged for special review by the director of the Heritage Fund. Yes, Ms. Ashmore. What time should I schedule them? Friday at 4 o'clock, I said. And Marcus? Yes. Book the Red Room. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The Red Room was not a standard conference room. It was a small, windowless chamber with sound-dampening walls and aggressive red abstract art, designed psychologically to make occupants feel cornered and anxious. We used it for hostile takeovers and firing executive staff. The Red Room. Understood. Ms. Ashmore. And one more thing, I added. Do not give them my name. Tell them they are meeting with Director Vera. Use my middle name. If they ask for a full name, tell them it is company policy to maintain anonymity until the non-disclosure agreements are signed. Got it. Director Vera? Friday at 4. I cut the connection. I walked over to the full-length mirror that stood in the corner of my office. I looked at myself. The woman looking back was impeccable. Not a hair out of place. No wrinkles of worry. Only lines of concentration. I thought about Richard and Elena. I thought about the $1 million. I thought about the moment my father told me to take $5,000 and disappear. I had disappeared. I had disappeared into the forge, and I had been hammered and beaten and folded over 1,000 times until all the weakness was gone. I adjusted the lapel of my jacket. I bared my teeth in the mirror. It wasn't a smile. It was the expression a surgeon wears before making the first incision. Welcome to the real world, Mom and Dad, I whispered to the empty room. I hope you brought a pen. Friday arrived with the inevitability of a ticking clock. I stood inside the Security Control Center on the 45th floor, a room bathed in the cool blue glow of 24 monitors. My hands were wrapped around a ceramic mug of black coffee. The heat seeping into my palms, grounding me. On the primary screen, a high-definition feed showed the main lobby of Ethelgard Capital. At exactly 3:55 in the afternoon, the revolving doors spun, depositing two figures onto the polished marble floor. I watched them. I did not blink. 8 years had been unkind to Richard and Elena Ashmore. The high-definition camera was merciless. It captured the way my father's once impeccable posture had slumped. His shoulders rounded under the invisible weight of debt. His suit, likely a remnant from his glory days, hung loosely on his frame, suggesting he had lost weight rapidly, the kind of weight loss that comes from stress and skipped meals. Not the gym. His hair, which he used to dye a defiant jet black, was now a patchy, thinning gray. He looked less like a titan of industry and more like a man trying to sell used cars in a rainstorm. My mother fared no better. Elena was wearing a Chanel suit that I recognized from a collection released 5 years ago. It was well preserved, but the hem was slightly dated. She clutched her handbag with the same white-knuckled desperation I remembered from my graduation, but her face had changed. Heavy makeup tried to conceal the deep lines of anxiety etched around her mouth and eyes. She looked brittle, as if a strong gust of wind might shatter her into porcelain shards. "They are here," Marcus said, standing beside me. He checked his tablet. "They are 5 minutes early." "Let them wait," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the tremors that used to plague me when I was around them. "Do not send anyone down to greet them yet. Let them stand at the reception desk for 10 minutes. Then, move them to Holding Room B." Holding Room B. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "The one without the windows." "The one without the windows," I confirmed. "And Marcus turned the thermostat down to 65 degrees, and make sure there is no cell service in that room." "Understood. Ms. Ashmore." This was not petty cruelty. This was negotiation. In the world of high-stakes finance, the battle begins long before the first handshake. You strip your opponent of their comfort. You disrupt their biological rhythm. You make them feel small, isolated, and cold. By the time they walked into the room with me, I wanted their adrenaline spiked and their confidence in the gutter. I watched on the screen as the receptionist, following my standing orders, ignored them for a full 4 minutes while pretending to type. I saw Richard tap his fingers on the marble counter, his agitation growing. Elena was smoothing her skirt repeatedly, A nervous tick. Finally, the receptionist looked up, offered a tight, professional smile, and gestured to the seating area. They sat, they waited. 10 minutes later, a junior intern collected them and escorted them to the elevator. I switched the camera feed to holding room B. It was a small, sterile room with 4 gray chairs and a coffee table containing nothing but year-old industry magazines. The walls were a neutral, oppressive beige. There was no clock. Richard and Elena entered. The door clicked shut behind them. 3 hours, I said to Marcus. I want them in there for 3 hours. 3 hours. Marcus paused. Their appointment is for 4 o'clock. Director Vera is a very busy woman, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Emergencies happen, meetings run late. If they want the money, they will wait. If they leave, the deal is off. I knew they wouldn't leave. They couldn't afford to. For the next 3 hours, I worked on other files, but I kept the audio feed from holding room B running in the background. It was an education in the collapse of a marriage. At first, they sat in silence. Then, the bickering started. You should have worn the blue tie, Elena hissed. This one looks cheap. It is a silk Hermes tie, Elena, Richard snapped, his voice tinny through the speakers. Shut up about the tie. Are you sure you have the balance sheets? I have the modified versions, Elena said. I stopped typing. I leaned in, turning up the volume. Modified, Richard muttered. You buried the tax lien. Of course I buried it, Elena whispered aggressively. I moved it under deferred operational costs. If they ask, it is a pending dispute with a vendor. Not the IRS. We just need this bridge loan to get the accounts unlocked. Once the cash hits, we pay the taxes, and no one is the wiser. And the gap in the 2018 fiscal year, Richard asked, $1 million. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. Research and development. Elena rehearsed. We told the auditors it was a failed prototype for a logistics tracking system. Sunk costs. Write-off. It's clean. It better be, Richard groaned, rubbing his temples. If Ethelgard digs too deep into the 2018 withdrawal, we are dead. That money vanished into thin air as far as the books are concerned. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp expression that felt tight on my face. They weren't just incompetent. They were frauds. They had taken the money they saved by disowning me and hidden it so poorly that even a first-year analyst could find the hole. But they were going to lie about it. They were going to look me in the eye and lie. Perfect. The sun began to set outside, casting long shadows across the city. Inside holding room B, Richard was pacing the small room, rubbing his arms against the chill I had manufactured. Elena was sitting with her eyes closed, muttering a prayer or a curse. I couldn't tell which. It was 7 o'clock. They had been waiting for 3 hours and 5 minutes. They were hungry, cold, anxious, and desperate. They were ready. Marcus, I said into the intercom, it is time. Bring them to the red room. I stood up and smoothed the front of my jacket. I walked to the private bathroom in my office and checked my reflection. I looked nothing like Thalia Ashmore. Thalia Ashmore was soft. Thalia Ashmore had eyes that begged for approval. The woman in the mirror was hard angles and expensive fabric. I applied a fresh coat of dark red lipstick, a shade called Power. I walked to the red room. The red room was designed for psychological dominance. Unlike the beige waiting room, this space was aggressive. The walls were painted a deep, oxblood red. The lighting was focused entirely on the 2 chairs placed in the center of the room for the guests, leaving the rest of the space in shadow. The art on the walls was jagged, abstract, and disturbing. I entered the room before they did. I sat in the high-backed leather executive chair behind the massive obsidian desk, but I didn't face the door. I swiveled the chair around so that my back was to the entrance. I faced the wall of windows looking out over the dark skyline of Manhattan. I wanted them to walk in and see only the back of a chair. I wanted them to feel dismissed before I even spoke. I heard the heavy door open. Director Vera will see you now, Marcus announced. His voice was professional, masking the theatricality of the moment. I heard footsteps, hesitant, shuffling footsteps, the sound of expensive shoes dragging on carpet. Director Vera. Richard's voice. It was shaky, pitching higher than normal. My apologies for the lateness. We were told there was a schedule conflict. I did not turn around. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting on the armrests, my silhouette framed by the city lights. Sit, I said. I used a voice technique I had learned from a speech coach. I pitched my voice lower, adding a gravelly resonance, and stripped it of any inflection. It was a command, not an offer. I heard the scrape of chairs. They sat. We are incredibly, tremendously grateful for this opportunity, Richard stammered, likely trying to figure out where to look since I was facing the window. Ethelgard Capital is the gold standard. We have long admired Mr. Vane's vision. I stayed silent. The silence stretched. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have prepared a presentation, Elena added, her voice trembling. Our company, Ashmore Logistics, has a 50-year history. We are a staple of the tri-state area. A staple that is currently $5 million in debt, I said to the window. Richard cleared his throat. A temporary liquidity crunch. Director, the market has been volatile, fuel prices, labor shortages, but the core of the business is sound. We are a family business. We value integrity above all else. I almost laughed. The word integrity coming from his mouth felt like a physical violation of the laws of physics. Integrity, I repeated, tasting the word. Yes, Richard rushed on, gaining a little confidence now that he was in his sales pitch. We believe in traditional values, honesty, hard work. The Ashmore name is our bond. We have never defaulted on a loan. We have never walked away from an obligation. We are asking Ethelgard to invest not just in a company, but in a legacy. We treat our partners like family. Like family, I echoed. Exactly, Richard said. We protect our own. I could hear the smile in his voice. He thought he was winning. He thought he was charming the eccentric director who sat in the dark. I have reviewed your ledger, I said, still facing the window. My hand moved to the file on my desk, flipping it open, though they couldn't see. There is a discrepancy in the 2018 fiscal year, a significant outflow of capital, $1 million withdrawn in a single cashier's check on May 25, 2018. The room went dead silent. The air pressure seemed to drop. I am not sure which transaction you refer to, Richard lied, though his voice had lost all its oil. May 25th, I said. The day of the Columbia University graduation ceremony. I heard Elena gasp. It was a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a sob. That was an operational expense, Richard said. He was talking faster now. Sweating. I could hear it. As we noted in the file, that was a heavy investment in research and development. We were prototyping a new fleet management system. It didn't pan out. It happens in business. It was a loss. Strictly corporate. R&D, I said flatly. Yes, Richard insisted. Research and development. We were trying to innovate, to build a future for the company. You are lying, I said. Excuse me. Richard's voice bristled with a hint of his old arrogance. Director, I resent the implication. I have been in this business for 40 years. I know my own books. And I know exactly where that money went, I said. I placed my hands on the edge of the desk. I took a deep breath. The moment was here. The trap was sprung. It did not go to research and development, I said. My voice rising just enough to cut through the darkness. I kicked off the floor, spinning the heavy leather chair around. The mechanism was silent, smooth. I turned 180 degrees, coming to a stop directly facing them. The light from the ceiling spotlights hit my face. I saw them, and they saw me. Richard was mid-sentence, his mouth open. Elena was gripping her purse. They froze. Their eyes widened. Their brains struggled to process the visual information. They were looking for a stranger, a director Vera. Instead, they were looking at a ghost, but not the ghost of the girl they destroyed. They were looking at the woman who had built a throne from the wreckage. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the desk, staring directly into Richard's terrified eyes. "Wrong," I said, my voice dropping back to that icy calm. "That was the price to buy freedom from your daughter." The silence that followed my revelation was absolute. It was not the quiet of a library or a church. It was the vacuum of space, a void where oxygen and sound simply ceased to exist. Richard and Elena Ashmore sat frozen in their chairs. Their mouths were slightly open, slack-jawed, destroying the carefully curated image of aristocratic composure they had tried to maintain for the last hour. They stared at me. They blinked. They squinted against the harsh, focused lighting of the Red Room for a long, agonizing minute. They did not know who I was. This was the most satisfying part. I had changed. I had molted. The girl they remembered was soft, round-faced, dressed in thrift store finds, with hair that was always frizzy from the humidity, and eyes that were constantly wide with the hope of being loved. The woman sitting across from them now was a stranger. My hair was a sharp, geometric blade of black silk. My skin was pale and luminous, the result of expensive dermatologists and zero sunlight. My suit was structured armor. My eyes were not hopeful. They were dead. Calm lakes. I watched the gears turn in their minds. They saw the resemblance. Surely. The nose, the shape of the chin. But their brains refused to process the data. It was a cognitive dissonance too great to bridge. Thalia is gone. Their minds whispered. Thalia is a failure. Thalia is poor. This woman is power. This woman is Director Vera. Then, it clicked for my mother. It started in her eyes. A wideness. A flicker of recognition that was immediately followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated horror. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching the pearls that were likely fake, given their financial state. "Thalia," she whispered. The name hung in the air, fragile and terrified. I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my legs slowly. I let a small, polite smile touch my lips. It was the smile one gives to a distant acquaintance at a funeral. "Hello, Mother," I said. "Hello, Father." The sound of my voice, deeper now, more modulated, but still undeniably mine, hit them like a physical slap. Richard actually flinched, his back hitting the leather of his chair with a dull thud. "It has been a long time," I continued, keeping my tone conversational. 8 years, 3 months, and 12 days. To be precise, I trust you have been well." I paused, letting the question linger before delivering the strike. "Did you enjoy the $1 million?" I asked. "Did it buy you the happiness you were looking for, or just the yacht?" Richard was struggling to breathe. His face had gone from pale to a mottled, unhealthy red. He gripped the armrests of his chair so hard I could hear the leather creak. He looked from me to the door, then back to me, as if searching for a trap door or an escape route. "Thalia," he choked out, "you are Director Vera." "I am Thalia Vera Ashmore," I corrected gently. "But yes, here, I am the director. I am the one holding your application. I am the one deciding if you survive the week." Richard's brain, a slippery, conniving thing, finally rebooted. I could see the shift happen in real time. The shock began to recede, replaced first by a flash of anger. How dare I trick him? How dare I be successful? And then, almost instantly, by an oily, desperate calculation, he realized that the woman sitting across from him was not an enemy to be fought, but a resource to be exploited. He forced a smile. It was a grotesque expression, stretching his thin lips over his teeth in a way that did not reach his eyes. He sat up straighter, adjusting his tie, trying to reclaim the role of the patriarch. "Thalia," he boomed, injecting a false, hearty warmth into his voice that made my skin crawl. "My God, look at you. Look at this office. Look at you." He laughed, a nervous, braying sound. "Elena, look at our daughter," he said, gesturing to me as if he had just unveiled a statue he commissioned. I knew it. I knew it all along. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on my desk, trying to invade my space, trying to reestablish intimacy. "You have to understand, sweetheart," Richard said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That day at the graduation, it was hard for us. It was the hardest thing we ever had to do, but we knew you had potential. We knew that if we coddled you, if we let you just inherit the money, you would never reach this height." He gestured around the room, encompassing the view of Manhattan, the expensive art, the power. "It was a test," Richard lied, his eyes wet with sincerity. "It was a push. We had to be cruel to be kind. We had to cut you loose so you could learn to fly. And look, you flew, you are a success. We are so proud of you. Thalia, we made you who you are." He sat back, looking satisfied, as if he had just explained away a decade of trauma with a greeting card slogan. For a moment, I just stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost impressive in its absolute lack of shame. He was trying to rewrite history, to turn his greed into a noble parenting strategy. I started to laugh. It was not a polite laugh. It was a loud, sharp, genuine laugh that echoed off the hard surfaces of the red room. It was the sound of something breaking, but it wasn't me. It was the last vestige of respect I held for him. "A test," I repeated, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. "You call publicly disowning your daughter in front of 2,000 people a test." My laughter cut off abruptly. My face went cold. "You called me a moral failure," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "You told the world I was unfit to carry your name. You sold me for a check. Richard, you didn't do it to teach me a lesson. You did it because Uncle Vance hated women and you love money. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending it was love. It was a transaction." Richard's smile faltered, but he didn't give up. "Now, Talia, let's not dwell on the past. We are family. Blood is thicker than—" "Stop," I said. I reached for the file on my desk, the file containing the details of their debt. I lifted it and let it drop. It hit the mahogany surface with a heavy, flat whack that sounded like a gavel. "I am not here to discuss blood," I said. "I am not here to discuss family. I am here to discuss business." I opened the file. "You are here because Ashmore Logistics is insolvent," I stated, reading from the page. "You owe 5 banks a total of $12 million. You have missed payroll twice in the last quarter. Your credit rating is junk status. You are begging for $5 million from a charity fund because no legitimate bank will touch you." "We have a cash flow problem," Richard insisted, his voice tight. "It is temporary." "It is terminal," I corrected. "Or at least, it was terminal until 6 months ago." I looked up at them. 6 months ago, the banks that held your debt were looking to offload it. They were tired of chasing you. They classified your loans as distressed assets, essentially garbage debt that they wanted to clear from their books. I paused, savoring the moment. "So, I bought it," I said softly. Richard froze. "What?" "Ethelgard Capital, through a shell company called Phoenix Holdings, purchased your debt," I explained. "We bought the notes from Chase, from Citibank, from everyone. We bought it all for 30 cents on the dollar." I leaned forward. "I am not just the director of the charity fund. Richard, I am your creditor. I own your debt. I own the mortgage on your warehouses. I own the lien on your fleet of trucks." I saw Elena pale further. She knew what was coming. "And," I added, looking directly at her, "I own the mortgage on the estate in Connecticut. You used the house as collateral for the business loan in 2022. Did you think I didn't know?" Richard was shaking his head, a look of pure terror dawning on him. No, that's not possible. The bank sold you to me," I said, "just like you sold me to the estate. It is poetic, isn't it?" I stood up. I walked around the desk, moving slowly, deliberately. I stood over them. They looked small, shrunken in their chairs. "Technically," I said, looking down at my father, "I could call in the loans today, right now. I could demand full repayment of the $12 million. You don't have it, which means I could foreclose on the company and the house by Monday morning. I could put you on the street. I could strip you of every asset, every suit, every piece of jewelry. Elena let out a sob. She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her fingers were cold and clammy. "Thalia, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "We are your parents. You can't do this. We will be destitute. We are too old to start over. Please, have mercy." I looked at her hand on mine. I felt nothing. No spark of love, no pity. Just the sensation of a stranger touching me. I pulled my hand away, wiping it subtly on my jacket. "Mercy," I mused. That is an interesting word. I seem to remember asking for a hug on that stage. I got a check for $5,000. "We will pay you back," Richard cried out. Desperate now. "Give us the $5 million from the fund. We will turn the company around. We will pay off the debt. We will give you interest. Just give us a chance." "I don't want your interest. Richard," I said. "I have enough money. I don't need profit." I walked back to the window, looking out at the city again. "However," I said, turning back to face them, "I am not unreasonable. I am willing to offer you a deal." Hope, that pathetic, resilient thing, flared in their eyes. "A deal?" Richard asked breathlessly. Anything you want. Thalia, you want a seat on the board. You want majority shares. Take 51%. Take it all. Just keep us afloat." "I don't want shares in a dying company," I said. "I want something else." I walked back to the desk and sat down. I picked up a pen, a heavy, black fountain pen, eerily similar to the one my father had tried to make me use 8 years ago. "I will approve the $5 million injection," I said. "I will restructure your debt. I will save the company. You will keep your house. You will keep your country club memberships. You will keep your dignity." Richard slumped with relief. "Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thalia, I knew you were a good girl. I knew—" "But—" I cut him off, my voice sharp as a guillotine blade. "There is a condition." "Anything," Richard said. "Name it." "The condition is not financial," I said. "It is public." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "You value your reputation, don't you, Richard? You value the name Ashmore. You preached about integrity on that stage." "Yes, yes." He nodded eagerly. "Good," I said. "Then here is the price. To receive the funds, you must call a press conference, a major one. We will invite the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and all the industry trade papers. A press conference." Richard looked confused. "To announce the partnership?" "No," I said. "To confess." The word hung in the air. "Confess," Elena whispered. "Confess what?" "Everything," I said calmly. "You will stand in front of the cameras, just like you stood in front of my graduating class, and you will read a statement that I will write. You will admit that you disowned your daughter solely to defraud a family trust. You will admit that you lied about my character. You will admit that you have been cooking the books for 5 years to hide your incompetence. You will admit that you are frauds." Richard's face went white. "I can't do that. That would destroy us. We would be laughingstocks. No one would do business with us." "That is the price," I said, shrugging. "You traded my reputation for money 8 years ago. Now, I am buying your reputation. The price is $5 million and the survival of your company. It is a fair trade." "You are asking us to commit social suicide," Richard shouted, standing up, his fear turning back into aggression. "I am asking you to tell the truth," I said. "You love the truth, don't you? Dad, honesty and blood, wasn't it?" I checked my watch. "You have 24 hours," I said. "Go home. Think about it. If you agree, we schedule the press conference for Monday. If you refuse, or if you try to run, I call in the loans on Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, the locks will be changed on your house." I pressed a button on my desk. The door to the Red Room clicked open. Get out of my office, I said. The heavy oak door to the red room did not close. My command to leave hung in the air, vibrating against the soundproof glass. But neither Richard nor Elena moved toward the exit. Instead, the reality of their positions seemed to liquefy their bones. They slumped in their chairs, the false bravado of the Ashmore legacy finally evaporating to reveal the terrified elderly couple beneath. "We cannot do it," Richard whispered. His voice was no longer the boom of a CEO. It was the raspy plea of a dying man. "Thalia, look at us. We are in our 60s. If we admit to fraud, if we admit to the disowning, we will be pariahs. The club will expel us. The board will sue us. We will lose our friends, our standing, everything." "You lost your standing the moment you spent money you did not earn," I replied, not looking up from the file I was pretending to read. "You are just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up to the math." Elena leaned forward, her hands shaking so violently that her bracelets rattled like chattering teeth. "Thalia, please, there must be another way. We are your flesh and blood. You cannot destroy us publicly. Just take the company. Take the house, but leave us our name. That is all we have left." I looked at her. Her mascara was running in dark rivulets down her cheeks. 8 years ago, she had stood in the shade while my father eviscerated me, holding the envelope of cash like a shield. Now, she was begging for the very dignity she had denied me. "I am not destroying you," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I am offering you a transaction. I am a venture capitalist. Mother, I look for value. Currently, the only value you possess is the truth. That is the asset I am buying." Richard wiped his face with a silk handkerchief. He looked at me, and I saw a flicker of the old greed ignite in his eyes. He had heard something in my tone, a hesitation, perhaps, or a misunderstanding of my cruelty. He thought he saw an opening to negotiate. $5 million, Richard muttered, testing the words. "You said you would inject $5 million. That saves the company. It clears the immediate debt." "It does," I confirmed. Richard sat up straighter. The prospect of money acted on him like a shot of adrenaline. "If we do this press conference, if we say what you want us to say, the money it is guaranteed. We keep the pensions. We keep the house. If you follow the script exactly," I said, "you will resign from the board immediately following the conference. You will retire to the Connecticut estate. You will receive a monthly stipend of $4,000 each. It is enough to buy groceries and pay for heat. It is not enough for yachts or galas." "4,000, Richard scoffed, his indignation momentarily overriding his fear. "That is an insult. We have expenses. We have standards. And you also have a prison sentence hanging over your head," I reminded him. $4,000 is $4,000 more than you will get in a federal penitentiary." Richard slammed his hand on the desk. The sound was sharp, violent. "I will not do it," he shouted, his face turning a deep, dangerous purple. "I will not stand in front of the cameras and humiliate myself. I am Richard Ashmore. I built this industry. I will not let a vindictive child dictate terms to me." "You are bluffing." "Thalia, you won't send your own parents to jail. It would ruin your reputation too. The press would eat you alive." He stood up, buttoning his jacket with trembling fingers, trying to summon the ghost of his authority. "We are leaving," Richard declared. "We will find money elsewhere. There are other investors. We will not be blackmailed." He turned to Elena. "Get up. We are going." I did not move. I did not blink. I simply reached into the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a small, sleek black tablet. I placed it on the mahogany surface and slid it across to them. "Sit down, Richard," I said. "I said we are leaving." "If you walk out that door," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming heavy with finality, "I email the contents of this tablet to the district attorney and the IRS. You won't make it to the elevator before the indictment is drafted." Richard froze. He looked at the tablet, then he looked at me. The defiance in his eyes wavered, replaced by a sick curiosity. "What is it?" he asked hoarsely. "Evidence," I said. "Click the play button." Richard hesitated, then reached out and tapped the screen. The audio was crisp, high fidelity. It wasn't the echoey sound of a camera phone recording from the audience. It was a direct feed. "Stop looking at me like a wounded animal." Thalia Richards' face went white. It was his voice, the voice from 8 years ago. Because of Uncle Vance. He left a contingency in the trust. If we have a daughter, we lose the money. If we have a stranger, we get the cash. The recording continued, capturing every vile whisper, every hiss of the confession he had made to me on the stage while the microphone was technically off for the crowd, but very much alive for the security feed. "You are just collateral damage." I reached out and paused the recording. "Julian Vane owns the security company that monitored the graduation," I explained simply. "He has kept this recording in a fireproof vault for 8 years. It proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that your public disowning of me was a fraudulent act committed solely to bypass the stipulations of a legal trust. That is fraud. Richard, felony fraud." Richard sank back into his chair. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. "That is ancient history," he stammered. "Statute of limitations. Fraud against an estate tolls differently when concealed," I countered, using the legal terminology I had mastered. "But if you are worried about recent history, swipe left." Richard's trembling finger swiped the screen. A document appeared. It was a PDF of an internal email chain from Ashmore Logistics, dated 3 months ago. "This is an email from you to your chief financial officer," I narrated. "In it, you explicitly instruct him to categorize the personal renovation of your master bathroom a cost of $200,000 as warehouse infrastructure repair. To avoid tax liability," I leaned forward. "That is tax evasion. Richard, that is not ancient history. That is a crime you committed 90 days ago, and I have the invoices, I have the bank transfers, I have everything." Elena let out a low moan, covering her face with her hands. She knew. She had signed off on the checks. "So here's the choice," I said, holding up 2 fingers. "Option A. You hold the press conference tomorrow at noon. You read the apology. You admit to the fraud with the trust. You admit to the tax errors. We will frame it as negligence rather than malice to keep you out of handcuffs, and you step down. I save the company. You retire to Connecticut with your stipend. You live out your days in shame, but in comfort." I lowered 1 finger. "Option B. You refuse. I release this packet to the authorities in 1 hour. The IRS raids your home by Monday. The estate executors sue you for the return of the $1 million plus damages. You go to prison for 5 to 10 years, and when you come out, you will be homeless, because I will have foreclosed on everything you own." I checked my watch. It was a Patek Philippe, worth more than their current car. "You have 24 hours to decide if you want to be a pensioner or an inmate." The silence that followed was broken only by Richard's ragged breathing. He stared at the tablet, his eyes bulging. The trap was perfect. There were no holes, no escape routes. Suddenly, the humiliation was too much for him. The man who had always controlled the narrative, who had always bullied his way to success, snapped. "You bitch!" he screamed. It happened fast. Richard lunged across the desk. His face was twisted into a rictus of pure hate. He wasn't seeing a director anymore. He was seeing the daughter he thought he owned, the property that had rebelled. He reached for my throat, his hands hooked into claws. "I will kill you," he roared. "I made you, I will unmake you." I did not flinch. I did not scream. I did not even stand up. I sat perfectly still, watching him come at me with a detached scientific interest. He was slow, he was old, and he was predictable. Before his fingers could graze the silk of my blouse, the side door of the red room burst open. Marcus and 2 large security officers in dark suits were in the room instantly. They didn't need to be called. I had kept the line open. They had heard the scream. One officer caught Richard's arm in midair, twisting it behind his back with practiced efficiency. Richard howled in pain as his face was pressed into the polished mahogany of my desk. "Get off me!" Richard shrieked, thrashing like a caught fish. "Do you know who I am? I am Richard Ashmore." "You are a trespasser," Marcus said coldly. Elena was screaming now, standing up and backing into the corner. "Don't hurt him. Please, don't hurt him." I stood up slowly. I walked around the desk to where my father was pinned. I looked down at his face, squashed against the wood, red and sweating and pathetic. "Let him up," I said to the guard. The guard hesitated, then released the arm, stepping back but keeping a hand on his taser. Richard scrambled back, rubbing his shoulder, panting heavily. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and terror. He realized, finally and truly, that he could not physically intimidate me. "You are a monster," he spat. "I am a CEO," I corrected. "There is very little difference." I walked over to the door and held it open. "The offer stands," I said, cold as ice. "Noon tomorrow. My team will email you the script. Do not deviate from it by a single word. If you are late, or if you change the narrative, I press send on the evidence." I looked at my mother. "Take him home. Elena, make sure he takes his blood pressure medication. I need him lucid for the cameras." Elena grabbed Richard's arm, pulling him toward the door. She looked at me one last time. There was no motherly love in that look. There was only the fear of a rabbit looking at a wolf. "We will be there," she whispered. Richard tried to say something else, likely another curse, but Elena yanked him into the hallway. The security guards followed them out to ensure they left the building. "Marcus," I said as the door began to close. "Yes, Director. Have the legal team draft the transfer of deed for the Connecticut property. I want it ready for signature immediately after the press conference. Consider it done." The door clicked shut. I was alone in the red room. I walked back to the window. The city lights were brighter now against the black sky. I placed my hand against the cool glass. My pulse was steady. My hands were not shaking. I had almost been strangled by my own father, and my heart rate hadn't even broken 80 beats per minute. Julian was right. The forge had done its work. The iron was gone. Only steel remained. I looked at the reflection of the clock in the window. 23 hours and 50 minutes remaining. I picked up the phone. "This is Director Vera. Prepare the media room for tomorrow, and order catering. We are going to have a show." The drive back to Connecticut was a study in suffocating silence, the interior of my father's Mercedes. Usually a sanctuary of leather-scented privilege, felt like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. I was not there. Of course. I was sitting in my penthouse in Manhattan, watching the GPS tracker I had installed on their vehicle 3 months ago, moving slowly along the I-95 corridor. But I did not need to be in the car to know exactly what was happening. Fear, when compressed by the weight of inevitable consequences, turns volatile. When they finally arrived at the estate, a sprawling, colonial monstrosity that they had mortgaged to the hilt, the explosion happened before they even made it through the front door. I had tapped their home security system weeks ago. The audio feeds from the foyer, the kitchen, and the master study were crystal clear. I sat on my sofa, a glass of water in hand, and listened to the self-destruction of the Ashmore dynasty. "You are a coward. Richard!" Elena's voice shrieked through my speakers. It was a raw, ugly sound, stripped of all its social graces. "You sat there and let her humiliate us. You let her treat us like criminals in front of those guards." "Shut up, Lena," Richard roared back. I heard the sound of glass shattering, likely a vase swept off the hallway table. "Do not lecture me about humiliation. Who signed the checks? Who insisted we needed the Italian marble in the guest bathrooms? Who needed a new wardrobe for the spring gala? You bled the company dry." "I spent money because you told me we were rich," Elena screamed. "You told me the accounts were full. You lied to me just like you lied to the shareholders." "I was managing perception," Richard yelled. "In this world, perception is reality. If we looked poor, the banks would have called the loans years ago. I kept us afloat by projecting strength. And what did you do? You preened like a peacock while I juggled the ledgers. And now we have to confess. Elena was sobbing now, a hysterical, gasping sound. We have to go on television and tell the world we are frauds. I can't do it. Richard, I can't face the girls at the club. I can't be the woman who stole from her own daughter. Then what do you suggest? Richard snapped. Do you want to go to prison? Did you see her eyes? She will do it. Elena, she is not Talia anymore. She is a machine. She will send us to federal prison without blinking. There was a pause, heavy and toxic. It is your fault, Elena whispered venomously. You were too hard on her that day. You were the one who made the speech. You were the one who called her a moral failure. If you had just been softer, if you had just let her down gently. Don't rewrite history, Richard barked. You were the one holding the envelope. You were the one nodding along. We were partners in this. Elena. And now, we are partners in the fall. I heard heavy footsteps stomping away. A door slammed. Richard had retreated to his study. Elena remained in the hallway, weeping. I set my glass down. It had taken them exactly 4 hours to turn on each other. I had estimated it would take 6. My parents were even more predictable than I had calculated. I switched the audio feed to the study. Richard was pouring a drink. I could hear the clink of the decanter against the crystal tumbler. Then the heavy glug of liquid. He drank it in one go. Then, I heard the sound of a landline being picked up. He was not calling his lawyer. He was dialing a number from memory. I leaned forward. Who was he calling? Pick up, Richard muttered under his breath. Loxley Partners. Evening desk, a voice answered. My eyes narrowed. Loxley Partners was Ethelgard's main competitor. They were a ruthless, second-tier firm that had been trying to steal our market share in logistics for a decade. Their CEO, Marcus Loxley, was a man with zero ethics and a deep hatred for Julian Vane. Connect me to Loxley, Richard hissed. This is Richard Ashmore. Mr. Loxley is at dinner. Sir. Interrupt him, Richard commanded, his voice trembling with a manic energy. Tell him I have the identity of the director of the Ethelgard Heritage Fund. Tell him I know who is buying up the distressed debt in the logistics sector. And tell him I have the frantic details of their acquisition strategy. I am willing to sell. I sat back, shaking my head. He was unbelievable, even with a gun to his head, even with 24 hours to save his company. His first instinct was not contrition, it was betrayal. He thought he could sell me out to Loxley. He thought that if he gave Loxley the information that I was Director Vera, Loxley might pay him enough to flee the country. He was trying to burn down my play before I could execute it. One moment, Mr. Ashmore, the receptionist said, while Richard waited on hold, breathing heavily. I heard a soft click on the line. It was a subtle sound, one that Richard, in his panic, missed. But I heard it. Someone had picked up the extension in the house. Elena was listening. She was standing in the kitchen or the bedroom, holding the receiver, listening to her husband try to sell corporate secrets to save his own skin. He hadn't mentioned her. He hadn't said we are willing to sell. He had said I. He was planning to take the cash from Loxley and run, leaving her to face the press conference and the debt alone. Mr. Loxley is coming to the line, the receptionist said. Richard Marcus Loxley's voice was smooth, oily. To what do I owe the pleasure I heard Ashmore Logistics was having a difficult quarter? I can give you Ethelgard, Richard said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I know who is running their shadow fund. It is my daughter, Thalia. She is Director Vera. She is over-leveraged. If you attack their position now. I did not need to hear the rest. I cut the feed to the study. I had heard enough. I picked up my own cell phone and waited. 3, 2, 1. My phone rang. The caller ID said, Mother. I answered on the first ring. Hello, Elena, I said. Thalia. Her voice was a ragged whisper. She sounded like she was hiding in a closet. Thalia, listen to me. You have to listen to me. I am listening, I said calmly. I assume you are calling to confirm the press conference time. No, she gasped. No, Thalia. He is betraying you. Your father. He is on the phone right now with Marcus Loxley. He is selling you out. He is telling them who you are. He is trying to get money to run away. I feigned a gasp. Is he really? Yes, he is a snake, Elena cried, her voice thick with panic and vindictiveness. He doesn't care about the company. He doesn't care about me. He is going to leave me here to face the police while he disappears with the money. Thalia, you have to believe me. I had nothing to do with it. I am loyal to you. Loyal, I repeated dryly. That is a strong word. Mother. I am, she insisted. I was always the one who wanted to send you birthday cards. He stopped me. He controlled everything. Thalia, please, if I help you stop him, will you spare me? The silence stretched out on the line. This was the moment of total fracture. The Ashmore family, that unit of honesty and blood, was now just two terrified animals tearing chunks of flesh off each other to survive. What are you asking for? Elena, I asked. The house, she whispered, and the stipend, but just for me. Cut him out. Let him go to jail. He deserves it. But let me keep the house. I can't be homeless. Thalia, I am your mother. You want to trade Dad for the villa? I asked. The cruelty of it was delicious. He is trading me for a plane ticket, she screeched. He broke the contract first. Please, Thalia, just promise me the house. I looked out the window at the lights of the Chrysler building. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a text message. I ignored it for a moment. Fine, I lied. Really? Elena sounded like she might faint with relief. Meet me at my office tomorrow morning at 8, I said. Before the press conference. Come alone. Don't tell Richard. We will sign a separate agreement that secures the house in your name only. Then, we will let Richard walk into the press conference thinking he is safe, and we will hand him over to the police. Yes, Elena breathed. Yes, that is perfect. I will be there. 8 o'clock. Thank you. Thalia, thank you. Good night. Mother? I hung up. I finally pulled out the other phone, my secure line. The text message was from a number that was not listed in any directory. It was from Julian Vane. He was currently in the cardiac wing of Mount Sinai Hospital, recovering from a minor procedure, but his mind never slept. The telemetry from the house shows increased activity. The message read, Do not wobble. Thalia, the rot is deep. If you cut out only half, the infection returns. Finish it cleanly. Do not let pity stain the legacy. I typed back, No pity, only business. I set the phone down and walked over to my desk. Spread out on the surface were the documents for tomorrow. There were 2 stacks. The first stack was the restructuring agreement I had shown them in the Red Room. It promised the $5 million injection, the retention of the house, and the stipends. It was a beautiful, generous document. I picked it up. I walked over to the shredder in the corner of my room. I fed the document into the machine. The blades whirred, slicing the lies into confetti. I walked back to the desk and picked up the second stack. These were the real documents. Asset liquidation and transfer of title. Irrevocable confession of judgment. Criminal referral packet. I was never going to save the company. I was never going to give them $5 million. I was never going to let them keep the house in Connecticut. The press conference was real. The confession was real. But the reward was a mirage. Ashmore Logistics was too far gone to be saved. The debt was toxic. The brand was poisoned. The only value left in the company was the physical assets, the trucks, the warehouses, the land. My plan was simple. I would let them destroy each other. Elena would come in tomorrow and sign a statement incriminating Richard to save herself. Richard, thinking he had a deal with Loxley which I would block by morning, as I had already alerted legal to issue a cease and desist to Loxley Partners for corporate espionage, would walk into a trap. They would both confess on live television. They would destroy their reputations, and then, once the cameras were off, I would reveal the truth. The $5 million was contingent on a clean audit, and since Richard had just admitted to cooking the books, the deal would be void. I would take the company for the debt. I would sell the trucks for scrap. I would sell the warehouses to Amazon. I would sell the Connecticut estate to a developer who wanted to turn it into condos. And Richard and Elena, they would have nothing. No house, no pension, no friends. And with their confessions on tape, the IRS would come for them whether I called them or not. I sat down in the dark, listening to the hum of the city. Greed had made them. Greed had destroyed me. And now, fear was eating them alive. I thought about the little girl who used to wait by the window for her parents to come home, hoping for a smile. I killed her in my mind. One last time. 8 o'clock. Mother, I whispered to the empty room. Don't be late. If revenge is a dish best served cold, then corporate justice is a dish best served with vintage champagne and a room full of people who smell blood in the water. The venue for the Ethelgard Capital 10th Anniversary Gala was the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. It was a space of aggressive opulence, dripping with crystal chandeliers and draped in heavy gold velvet. It was the perfect stage. I had chosen it deliberately. It was the exact architectural antithesis of the sun-drenched, humid quad at Columbia University, where my life had been incinerated 8 years ago. Here, the air was climate-controlled to a crisp 68 degrees, and the lighting was designed to make diamonds sparkle and sweat visible. I stood on the balcony overlooking the ballroom, a glass of sparkling water in my hand. Below me, 300 of New York's financial elite were mingling. There were hedge fund managers, tech moguls, and senators, but scattered among them, looking uncomfortable in ill-fitting suits, were agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division. They were my VIP guests, though they were not listed on the program. At 8 o'clock sharp, the heavy double doors opened, and the guests of honor arrived. Richard and Elena Ashmore entered the room. They looked spectacular, in a tragic sort of way. My father was wearing a tuxedo that I knew he had purchased on credit that morning. He had dyed his hair again, a harsh, shoe-polish black that clashed with his pale, anxious skin. He walked with a strut that was too wide, too loud, trying to project the confidence of a man who had just secured a $5 million lifeline. My mother was on his arm, wearing a silver gown that shimmered like fish scales. She was smiling, but her eyes were darting around the room like a cornered rodent. They were holding hands. It was a masterclass in deception. Just last night, they had been tearing each other apart. Richard had tried to sell my identity to a rival. Elena had called me to beg for the house in exchange for betraying Richard. But tonight, they were the united front of Ashmore Logistics. They believed the lie. They believed that if they played their part at this celebration, if they made their little speech about restructuring and family unity, I would sign the check, and they would limp back to Connecticut with their secrets safe. I watched them circulate. Richard was laughing too loudly at a joke made by a banking CEO who was actually there to witness his execution. Elena was gripping a glass of champagne with 2 hands. I set my water down. It was showtime. I descended the grand staircase. The room went quiet as I moved. The Ice Queen had arrived. I wore a gown of deep, blood-red silk, a deliberate choice. It was the color of the room where I had trapped them. It was the color of the ink on their balance sheets. Director Vera, Richard called out when he saw me, his voice booming. He extended his arms as if to hug me. Or should I say, Thalia, my brilliant daughter. The crowd murmured. This was the narrative we had agreed upon. The prodigal daughter returns to save the family legacy. I stopped 3 feet from him. I did not smile. I did not open my arms. Hello, Richard, I said. Hello, Elena. It is a magnificent party. Darling, Elena gushed, her voice shrill. Everything is so tasteful. It is a retrospective, I said, my voice amplified by the acoustics of the room. Tonight is about looking back at where we came from and seeing exactly what it cost to get here. Richard winked at me. A grotesque gesture. He thought I was talking about hard work. He thought we were sharing a private joke. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, turning to the crowd. A hush fell over the room. If everyone could please turn their attention to the main screen, we have prepared a short video to honor the history of Ashmore Logistics and its impending acquisition by Ethelgard Capital. Richard puffed out his chest. He squeezed Elena's hand. They looked at the massive LED screen behind the stage, expecting a montage of trucks driving into sunsets and photos of Richard shaking hands with mayors. The lights dimmed. The music started a soaring, inspirational orchestral piece. The screen flickered to life. It started innocently enough. A black and white photo of my grandfather founding the company, a clip of Richard in the 90s, looking young and arrogant. Ashmore Logistics, the narrator's voice, smooth and professional, boomed. Built on a foundation of integrity. Then, the screen glitched. The music distorted. Twisting into a low, discordant hum, the inspirational images vanished. In their place, a spreadsheet appeared. It was not just any spreadsheet. It was the shadow ledger that Elena had emailed me at 8:30 that morning. Believing it would buy her immunity, the rows were highlighted in neon red. Tax evasion, fiscal year 2021. The text on the screen read, Method falsified vendor invoices. The crowd gasped. It was a sharp, collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Richard froze. His smile didn't just drop. It disintegrated. He stared at the screen, his brain refusing to comprehend what he was seeing. What is this? He whispered. Thalia, what is this? Keep watching, I said softly. The screen changed again. Now it showed a PDF of an email. Subject Trust Fund Liquidation. The header read, From Richard Ashmore to Henderson Law. The text was zoomed in. We need to fabricate a cause for disownment. The girl is an obstacle. If we remove her, the $1 million is released immediately. Draft the speech. Make it brutal. The murmur in the room turned into a roar. People were pulling out their phones. The flashbulbs started popping, blinding and relentless. No, Richard moaned. No, that's fake. That's a deep fake. And finally, the narrator's voice returned. But this time, it wasn't the professional voice actor. It was Richard's voice. It was the recording from last night. The waveform appeared on the screen, bouncing in time with his words. I can give you Ethelgard, Richard's voice hissed through the massive speakers, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. I know who is running their shadow fund. It is my daughter, Thalia. I am willing to sell. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and terminal. Richard turned slowly to look at me. His face was gray. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. You, he choked. You recorded me. I recorded everyone. I said, then, the chaos of the double cross hit the floor. Richard turned to Elena. He realized where the spreadsheet had come from. The tax documents were on her private laptop. You gave her the ledger, Richard screamed, grabbing Elena's arm. You traitor! You gave her the books. You tried to sell me out to Loxley, Elena shrieked back, slapping his hand away. I heard you on the phone. You were going to leave me with the debt. I was trying to save us, Richard yelled. Forgetting the audience, forgetting the cameras. I was going to get the cash and we could run. Now look what you've done. You've handed her the murder weapon. They were screaming at each other in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by the elite of New York, stripping away the last shreds of their dignity. It was grotesque. It was pathetic. And it was exactly what I wanted. Enough, I said. I didn't shout. I simply spoke into the microphone on the podium. I walked up the steps to the stage. I stood exactly where Richard had stood 8 years ago. I looked down at them. They were small. They were messy. They were finished. There is no deal, I announced to the room. Richard looked up, his eyes wild. But the $5 million? You promised the press conference. I lied, I said. I learned from the best. I looked out at the audience. Ashmore Logistics is insolvent, I declared. Its liabilities exceed its assets by $12 million. Its leadership has just publicly confessed via the evidence you just saw to federal tax evasion. fraud against a charitable trust, and corporate espionage. I paused. Therefore, the value of the company is 0. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a single, crisp bill. However, I continued, Ethelgard Capital assumes the debt obligations in exchange for 100% of the equity. I held up the bill. I am buying Ashmore Logistics, and all personal assets used as collateral, including the estate in Connecticut and the contents of their bank accounts for the sum of $1. I let the bill flutter down from the stage. It drifted through the air, slow and mocking, and landed at Richard's feet. Sold, I said. That was the signal. From the shadows of the pillars, 6 men in dark windbreakers stepped forward. They didn't have champagne glasses. They had handcuffs. Richard Ashmore, one of the agents said, stepping into the circle of light. I am Special Agent Miller with the FBI. You are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit economic espionage. Richard didn't fight. He couldn't. His legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees. Right next to the $1 bill, he looked at the money. He looked at the handcuffs. He looked at me. Thalia, he whispered, I am your father. You resigned from that position 8 years ago, I said. Now, you are just a liability I have written off. The agent pulled Richard's hands behind his back. The click of the cuffs was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was better than applause. Elena stood frozen. She watched her husband being hauled to his feet. Then she looked at me, a frantic hope lighting up her eyes. She thought she was safe. She thought our morning deal protected her. Thalia, she called out, stepping toward the stage. Thalia, tell them I helped you, the house, the agreement. Agent Miller, I said into the microphone. I believe the tax fraud documents clearly show the signature of the chief financial officer on every fraudulent invoice. The agent nodded. They do, Ms. Ashmore. And who was the CFO of Ashmore Logistics? I asked. Elena Ashmore, the agent replied. Elena screamed. It was a high, thin sound of absolute betrayal. You promised, she wailed. You promised me the house. I sold him out for you. You sold him out to save yourself, I said cold and hard. That isn't cooperation. Mother, that is just more greed, and I don't negotiate with terrorists. 2 female agents stepped forward and took Elena's arms. She began to sob, her knees buckling, dragging the hem of her silver dress through the spilled champagne. Thalia, she begged, her voice cracking. Please, we are family. Blood is thicker than water. Don't do this. I will die in prison, Thalia. I watched them. I watched the people who had given me life, and then tried to take it away for profit. I watched them being dragged out of the ballroom, past the staring faces of their former peers. Flashbulbs went off in their faces, immortalizing their ruin, just as they had immortalized mine. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was a text from Julian. He was watching the live stream from his hospital bed. Clean, the message read. The stock just jumped 4 points. The market loves a cleanup. I looked back at the empty spot on the floor where my parents had stood. The $1 bill was still there. Untouched. No one wanted it. It was tainted. I turned to the stunned audience. The silence was thick, fearful. They were looking at me not as a young woman, but as a predator who had just eaten her own kind. They were afraid. Good. Please, I said, raising my glass. Enjoy the party. The open bar is available until midnight. And remember, I paused, letting a small, dangerous smile touch my lips. At Ethelgard, we always settle our accounts. I turned my back on the crowd and walked off the stage. I didn't look back at the chaos. I didn't look back at the wailing of my mother that could still be heard from the lobby. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking on the marble, a rhythm of victory. I had bought my life back for $1. It was the best deal I had ever made. The ballroom was in chaos, but it was a controlled chaos, a symphony of justice that I had conducted to perfection. The flashbulbs were still popping. creating a strobe light effect that made my father's final breakdown look like a disjointed, horrific silent film. Richard Ashmore was not going quietly. As the reality of the handcuffs bit into his wrists, the shock wore off, replaced by a feral, cornered rage. He twisted violently in the grip of Special Agent Miller, his face a mask of purple fury, veins bulging in his neck like cords of rope. "Get your hands off me!" Richard screamed, his voice cracking with the strain. "Do you know who I am? I am Ashmore. This is a mistake. My daughter is mentally unstable. She is doing this out of spite." He lunged toward me. Though the agents held him firm, he looked at me with eyes that held no love, no regret, only a burning, consuming hatred. "You ungrateful, wretched girl," he spat, froth gathering at the corners of his mouth. "I gave you life, I put a roof over your head, and this is how you repay me, by feeding your own father to the wolves. You are unnatural. You are a monster. You are no daughter of mine." The room fell silent again. Waiting for my reaction, the elite of New York held their breath. They expected the Ice Queen to flinch. They expected the daughter to crumble under the weight of her father's curse. I did not flinch. I did not crumble. I walked down the remaining steps of the stage. My heels clicked rhythmically on the marble floor, a steady, calm beat against the backdrop of his hysteria. I signaled to the agents with a slight raising of my hand. They paused, holding Richard in place, allowing me to enter his personal space one last time. I stood toe-to-toe with him. I was close enough to smell the stale champagne on his breath and the sour reek of his fear. I looked deep into his eyes, searching for any trace of the man I had worshipped as a child. I found nothing, just a terrified, greedy stranger in a rented tuxedo. "You are right," I said. My voice was not a shout. It was conversational, amplified only by the pin-drop silence of the room. "I am not your daughter," I continued, my voice steady as bedrock. "Your daughter died on a stage at Columbia University 8 years ago. She died begging for your approval. I am someone else entirely." Richard stopped struggling. He stared at me, panting, his eyes darting back and forth across my face. "I am the stranger," I whispered, leaning in so only he and the front row could hear. "I am the stranger who bought your life. I am the stranger who owns your debt. I am the stranger who just foreclosed on your legacy." I reached into my clutch purse. My fingers brushed against the cool leather of my wallet. I pulled out a single, crisp $1 bill. It wasn't the one I had thrown on the floor earlier. It was fresh, clean. I reached out and tucked the bill into the breast pocket of his tuxedo, right next to his silk pocket square. I patted it gently. "Here is your inheritance, Richard," I said, cold and final. "You sold me for $1 million. I bought you for $1 million. Keep the change. You will need it for the commissary and federal prison." Richard opened his mouth to speak, to curse me again, but no sound came out. The absolute totality of his defeat had finally crushed his windpipe. "Take him," I said to the agents, as they began to drag him toward the exit. I turned my attention to Elena. She was still sobbing in the grip of the female agents, her silver dress ruined, her makeup a tragic mask. She looked at me with pleading eyes, waiting for the mercy I had denied her husband. She thought that because I had targeted Richard, she might be spared. "Thalia," she whimpered. "Please, I have nowhere to go. They seized the house. They froze the accounts. I have nothing." I looked at the agents holding her. "Release her," I commanded. The agents hesitated, then let go of her arms. Elena slumped, nearly falling, then caught herself. A look of delirious relief washed over her face. "Oh, thank you," she breathed, reaching out to me. "Thank you, Thalia. I knew you wouldn't. I am not releasing you because I forgive you." I cut her off, my voice sharp enough to draw blood. "I am releasing you because you are not worth the taxpayers' money to incarcerate." Elena froze. "What?" "Richard is the mastermind," I said, my voice projecting to the room. "You were just the accomplice. The government will take him. But me? I am taking everything else." I took a step closer to her. I have already executed the seizure of the Connecticut estate, I said. The locks were changed an hour ago. Your clothes, your jewelry, your art collection. It is all being auctioned off on Monday to pay down the company's debt. You have no home. Elena, you have no car. You have no money. But where will I go? She whispered, horror dawning on her. I hear the city has excellent shelters, I said, my face impassive. And there are government programs for the indigent. You always used to complain about your tax dollars going to lazy people on welfare. Now, you get to experience the generosity of the state firsthand. You can't leave me on the street, she shrieked, grabbing at my dress. I stepped back, and she grasped only air. You left me on a stage with $5,000 and a broken heart, I said. I am leaving you with your freedom. It is more than you gave me. I turned to the security staff of the hotel. Escort Mrs. Ashmore to the sidewalk, I ordered. She is no longer a guest of this event, Elena screamed as the security guards took her arms not gently this time, but with the professional firmness reserved for trespassers. She was dragged out, wailing, a ghost of a woman who had valued things over people. Now left with neither. Richard was shoved through the double doors, his head hanging low. Elena was dragged out behind him, destined for a different, colder kind of prison. As the doors swung shut, sealing away the toxicity that had poisoned my life for 3 decades. A sound started. It began with a single clap, then another, then it swelled. The entire ballroom, 300 of the most powerful, cynical people in New York, was applauding. They were not applauding the drama. They were not applauding the tragedy. They were applauding the kill. They were applauding the absolute brutal efficiency of justice. In their world, weakness was the only sin, and I had just proven I was sinless. I stood there, letting the applause wash over me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I felt clean. It was the feeling of walking out of a surgery after a malignant growth has been cut from your body. There is pain, yes, but there is also the knowledge that you are going to live. The crowd parted near the entrance. A hush fell over the room again as a wheelchair moved forward. Julian Vane. He had defied his doctors. He was wearing his black suit, a blanket over his knees, his face pale but his eyes burning with a fierce, proud light. He rolled to the center of the room, stopping in front of me. He didn't speak to the crowd. He looked only at me. He nodded. One slow, deliberate nod, lesson complete. His eyes said, "The iron is forged." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather folder. He held it out to me. "The transfer papers," Julian rasped, his voice weak but audible. "Sign them, Thalia. It is yours." I took the folder. A waiter appeared with a pen on a silver tray. I didn't hesitate. I opened the folder. The documents transferred full control of Ashmore Logistics assets, liabilities, and brand to Ethelgard Capital, under my direct management. I signed my name, not Thalia Ashmore. I signed Thalia Vera. "One change," I said, looking down at Julian. "Name it," he said. "The name," I said. "Ashmore Logistics is dead. We bury it tonight." I took the pen and struck a thick line through the company name at the top of the header. Above it, in bold, jagged strokes, I wrote a new name. "Phoenix Ventures," I said, "because we rise from the ashes." Julian smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had seen on his face in 8 years. "Phoenix Ventures. I like it. It sounds expensive." An hour later, I stood on the roof of the Pierre Hotel. The party was still raging below, but I needed the air. The wind was whipping around me, cold and biting, smelling of ozone and the Atlantic Ocean. I walked to the edge of the parapet and looked down at the grid of Manhattan. From up here, the cars looked like blood cells moving through arteries. The city was a living thing, indifferent to individual suffering. Powered by ambition and money, I owned a piece of it now, a significant piece. I took a deep breath, the knot in my chest, the one that had been there since I was 24 years old, was gone. I felt light. I felt untethered. I was an orphan. I was a destroyer. I was a CEO. But mostly, for the first time in my life, I was free. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus. Director. Marcus answered on the first ring. The press release is out. The stock is rallying. It's a bloodbath for Ashmore, but a gold rush for us. Good, I said, looking out at the horizon where the dark line of the Atlantic met the sky. Marcus, I have one last order for the night. Go ahead. The Connecticut estate, I said. The one we just seized. Yes. Do you want to list it with Sotheby's? The market is hot for colonial mansions. No, I said. Sell it. But not to a developer. Sell it quickly. Liquidate the furniture, the cars, the jewelry, everything Elena left behind. Okay, Marcus said, the sound of his typing clicking in the background. And where should I route the proceeds? Into the General Acquisition Fund? No, I said. I want you to use the money to establish a permanent endowment fund. A charity? Marcus asked, surprised. What is the mission statement? It is a full-ride scholarship fund, I said, my voice catching in the wind. For university students who have been disowned by their families due to gender, orientation, or career choice, it covers tuition, housing, and living expenses. No student should ever have to sign a waiver to eat. That is very generous. Thalia, Marcus said softly, what do you want to call the fund? The Ashmore Foundation? I laughed. It was a soft, free sound that carried away into the night. No, I said, absolutely not. I looked down at the city one last time, at the millions of strangers living their lives, fighting their battles. Call it the stranger, I said, because sometimes a stranger is the only family you have. I hung up the phone. I stood there for a long time, watching the city breathe, ready to start my life, my real life at last. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate redemption. It has been a journey, and I hope you felt every twist and turn along with Thalia. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a bustling city like New York, or somewhere quiet and peaceful? Please leave a comment down below with your location, and let's get a conversation started. I read every single one. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please make sure to subscribe to the BitterSweet Drama Stories channel. Hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us, and helps us bring more of these emotional roller coasters to life. Until next time.